Well, good afternoon, Tom. Thank you for being here today. Today, I would like to discuss a topic that you haven't spoken that much about, and we've received a lot of questions about. I wonder if you could speak on the subject of near death experiences. There's a lot of information out there today. A lot of people have experienced this, and it's a very interesting topic. Could you please tell us a little bit about the near death experiences from the point of view of MBT?
Sure. Well, the first thing that I need to explain in understanding these experiences is that what you report seeing and what you report hearing isn't necessarily what was there. Okay, there's a difference between the information that we get, how we interpret that information, and then how we put that into words. And each of those processes is a process with inherent noise in it, with inherent uncertainty in it. So let me run through that first, because that will explain a lot of the differences that occur. Well, these people, when they had their near-death experience, they experienced this, and other people experienced that. And well, they can't both be true. So we have lots of issues like that that will be answered just by understanding the nature of communication. So let's just talk about two people communicating, okay? And let's say it's just you and I, Donna. So if I'm talking, then you get that as information. Your ears pick up those acoustic vibrations, shake your eardrums, which create signals in the oral part of your brain. And then you take those signals, and when you get them, you have to interpret them into something that fits into this reality or your reality. So we all don't have the same sensory apparatus, so we all don't hear exactly the same or see exactly the same or even feel or taste or smell exactly the same as somebody else. So we start off with the fact that that's different. Now, when I talk to you and you get that information as impulses in your central nervous system, again, you have to interpret that. That's information that you interpret. And the only way you can interpret it is in terms of your past experience, your past understandings. So how you interpret it depends on who you are, what you've seen, what you've done, where you've been, your attitudes, your feelings about things. All of that will color the way you interpret it. So two people can hear the very same thing, but each may interpret it differently. Somebody say, oh, we both heard so-and-so speak, and boy, he sounded really angry. And the other person might say, angry? I didn't hear any anger. He seemed concerned about something, or, he was in a serious mood, but I didn't hear any anger. So that's what I mean. You interpret things. If you have beliefs about anything, not just religious beliefs, but cultural beliefs, scientific beliefs, whatever your beliefs are, they will color how you interpret things. If you have fears, those fears will color how you interpret things. So now let's talk about what that has to do with people who have a near-death experience. When they have this near-death experience, they're getting information. Okay, now that information that they're getting is coming from outside of what we call the physical world. It's coming from the realm of consciousness. Okay, consciousness is something bigger than just the physical reality. So that's one understanding. Okay, we have to, I guess that's a kind of a premise here as well. Consciousness is the larger system. So when they get this information, they take it in, and it gets filtered and colored by their beliefs and fears, attitudes, what they know by their knowledge, and what they don't know by their ignorance. So where one person who is, let's say, very fearful has a higher probability of having a fearful experience. They're liable to have a near-death experience, and scary things happen. Things happen that are frustrating. Things happen that just don't seem to work. Other times they may feel like are meeting other beings or entities or something that are negative, that are harmful or hurtful or arrogant or bullying or whatever. Well, that is how they interpret that data. If you are fearful, you tend to look for things that are scary. You look for those things that will frighten you. If you're not fearful, if you're a very positive person without fear, then you don't look for fearful things. You're not looking to see those. Oh, where's the hook in that deal? How are they going to get me? What's the problem with this? What's wrong with this? In other words, if you're always looking at things from a negative viewpoint, then you will find things that are negative just because you'll interpret them that way. Doesn't necessarily mean there are negative things there, but that's what you'll see. And if you're very positive, you'll tend to see things in a positive light.
The ones that you read about are all I was enveloped in this beautiful light and felt like I was at one with everything. So you do hear
you hear a lot of
mostly
those, but there's some other ones that see see demons and terrible things.
Yeah.
You have some of all sorts, but it depends on the people and on the individual. So that's my first point, is that when somebody says, I had an NDE and here's what it was, you can't take that at exactly face value, that this is exactly what happened. They got some information, and this is how they interpreted it, okay? So if you tend to be a very religious person, then you see God, or you see angels, or you see things that make sense to you from a belief in religious icons and ideas. If you're not a religious person, you're not going to see God and angels and saints and that sort of thing. You're going to see maybe just figures or individuals. And maybe you think that they're very loving or grown up or this or that, but you don't interpret it in terms of religious symbols. So that's what I'm saying. So first of all, we just agree that what people report is not necessarily what they saw. It's what they saw and heard modified by their own person.
Does this explain how different religions and different beliefs, since you claim that we do live in an individual reality, does that explain how some may see their religious figures and their ideas of God or different things like that? It's all very individual.
Exactly. It's all very individual, right? So a religious person sees that bright white light that is just all love and everything, all there is, all at one, and they become one with it. And if you're religious, then that's God. You experience God. If you're not religious, that's not God. So it just depends, you see, on who's talking and the kind of beliefs they have. So you have to read between the lines, not just read the lines and taking everything literally, but looking at the concepts, the ideas that are there. What's the meaning? What's really the content? Not necessarily the words that are used, but the content. And so that's one thing. So always read between the lines. And this is true also of people who report anything. You have 5 people on the street corner and an accident happens at the street corner. And even though all 5 of them were standing right there at the bus stop together, everyone sees it differently. It's the same sort of thing. So that's one thing. Now, what happens in these near-death experiences is that a person is not a body. A person is a consciousness. Okay, so in MBT's world, consciousness is who you are. This body is an avatar that you are playing, but you make all the choices for the avatar. So everything the avatar says, does, feels, thinks, sees, hears, that's the consciousness is interpreting that data, that sense data. Okay, so we're talking about consciousness. So when you have an out of body, or when you find yourself, above the operating table in an NDE, you've basically let go of, you are consciousness, but you've let go of getting exclusively the data through the avatar. Okay, so instead of just getting the data that represents the avatar's senses, now you're getting data inside this consciousness realm. You're now in the world of consciousness, not just this virtual reality that we call, the physical world. So when you're in this world of consciousness, there are multiple things that can happen. And one of these is that what I call the larger consciousness system, or you can just call that source, that's basically fundamental, source consciousness. And we as individual pieces of consciousness are just pieces of that source. Okay, now you can run into information that's given to you or sent to you by that source, or you can run into information that's sent to you by some other individuated unit of consciousness, because all of that is available out there in consciousness space. And there's one other source of information you may run into, and that is you may run into information that you create, because you are a consciousness. And as a consciousness, you can create information. That's what consciousness does. It creates information, it sends and receives information, it communicates. That's the nature of consciousness. So one of three things: you're going to have source sending you information, some other individuated unit of consciousness sending you information, or you're going to be creating it out of your own imagination. You're going to be creating it yourself. Now, there's no tags on any of that. So nobody really knows which of those three sources is the data that they get. All they get is the data. It doesn't say, oh, this is blue data and that's red data and this is green data, or doesn't have little tags on it to let you know. So people will get information from all three of those. Sometimes the experience they have will be bits and pieces of all three, not just one or the other. Sometimes it is just one or the other. So this tells us that there's a huge variation in the kind of experiences that somebody can have when they have a near-death experience. But now let's talk about what's most typical. The typical NDE, where the person finds themselves, and sometimes they're just they're there, maybe even over the operating table, or they just become aware that they exist, that they are conscious, that they're aware of things. And sometimes they move toward the light, but sometimes they don't have to move. The light comes to them. But all these things are just different. For example, the moving through the tunnel to the light comes from a belief of ours, because we believe that if we don't move, we can't get anywhere. That's just the way it is in our physical reality. If you don't move, you're not going to go anywhere. So if they're going to go to that light, then they have to move. And the only way they can have the sensation of moving is if the background goes by them. So in their mind, in order to interpret that moving, that concept of moving, they create a tunnel. And then they go through the tunnel, because that then gives them the sense of moving. And without that, moving isn't defined for them. So some people find tunnels, some people don't. So it's not like, is NDEs, are they really full of tunnels out there or what? Well, no, these are just things that come out of a person's beliefs of the way they think reality works. So the typical NDE is that when a person lets go of the sense data of their avatar, they become disconnected from this data stream, the data stream that defines us in the physical universe. Now they're open to connect to data streams that are just in the realm of consciousness. What typically happens is that the larger consciousness system sees this as an opportunity to help give them a bigger picture, a better understanding. You might say, kind of boot them out of the rut that they're in, the belief systems that they're in. Let them see that reality is much larger than just the physical. And why would the system want to do that? Well, because that is on the path to consciousness evolving, consciousness growing up, lowering its entropy, becoming caring and cooperative. First, you have to see a bigger picture. If all you see is a little picture, then everything tends to be about you. You see a little picture and you tend to be at the center of it. As you see bigger and bigger pictures, you tend to find humility because you see yourself as a tiny little piece in a very big system, which doesn't make you at the center of anything. So this is part of the growing up process, to let go of self-centeredness, to have bigger pictures and bigger understandings of yourself and how you connect with others and the nature of our reality. So the system likes to help people kind of wake up to that bigger picture. And when somebody gets out of body, out of body and an NDE are very similar, except the person getting out of body is doing it on purpose and they're not close to death. On the other hand, a person who doesn't even recognize the term out of body might be having some kind of near-death experience and have a similar thing happen to them. In both cases, they end up out in the realm of consciousness. And what happens then is that the system tends to send them a data stream. And they get that data and they interpret it according to what's inside of them. So often what they'll get is the system will show them that, look, you are here, you are aware, and no, this is not, you're not still in Kansas, this is not the physical reality. There's more to reality than just the physical. The system doesn't have to tell them all this, but they get this. This is the sense, the understanding they have, that reality is bigger and that they are existing in this non-physical space. And by non-physical, I mean not in our physical universe, outside of our physical universe. And depending on that person, but if that person tends to be positive and tends to relate to the idea that they are aware in this space without freaking out or without being negative or being fearful, then the system will tend to show them a little bit about what it's like. And this idea that there's this light, light is part of our metaphoric belief system. The white light is the pure thing. White is pure, right? The good cowboys wear white hats. The bride wears a white dress. We have this association in our culture with white, which is pure and good and radiant, and angels all dress in white. It's that sort of thing. So you see this white light, which is white, and everything else around is kind of dark because it's just this one data stream that's going to give them this experience. And in this experience, the system shows them what the nature of evolved consciousness is like. Okay, now the individual having the NDE is a consciousness. Okay, and you and I are each a consciousness, and we can interact. And we're all part of this larger thing, but we're all individual chunks of this larger thing. Just like my fingers are all individual things, on my hand, and my arms are individual things, on my body, but they're part of the whole. Well, it's like that. So the system will send them this data stream to show them that consciousness is about love. It's not about self-centeredness. It's about connecting and caring and being a part of something bigger, contributing to something bigger. That's the message, because indeed, that is the way the consciousness system is. Consciousness systems evolve by lowering their entropy, creating more information. Consciousness is an information system. And that lowering the entropy is equivalent to becoming love, caring, cooperating. And that is the same as letting go of your fear. Okay, now fear is what makes us self-centered. It's all about us. Make sure that we get what we need. So it's about letting go of fear too. So I'm kind of saying all these things that are really the same thing from a different perspective. So it shows us that there's something bigger. There's something more important than just us, that the reality includes us, and that we are an important part of it, and that we kind of have a job to do, and that's to grow up, become love. And this is the message. Now, everybody gets this message in a different way. Like we said, everyone who gets that message interprets it in terms of themselves. Oh, I met God and talked to an angel. Or, oh, I was one with this big light. And suddenly I found myself connected to everything, every blade of grass, every leaf on every tree on the whole planet. I was a piece of everything, but I lost my identity. I wasn't Tom Campbell. I just existed as an integral part of everything. You know, that's the non-dualist idea. We're all one, we're all connected. And it's about caring and about love. So they have this feeling because that's what the system wants to give them to help them see the bigger picture. So it's really, they're having an experience with the larger consciousness system. And that system is trying to show them a bigger picture. Now, at different people, it may show it in different ways because the system is conscious. It is a conscious system. So it's not just some consciousness machine. And the consciousness system will look at an individual and say, well, this person would probably relate more to this kind of imagery and this kind of an experience. So that's what they get. Somebody else will get something different. So indeed, the religious person may be met by angels and whatever, because that is a better way to communicate what it's trying to communicate with them. So the system will appear in a way that is most likely to be successful with individuals. Now, some individuals are so fearful that anything that gets presented to them, they're going to turn it into something ugly and awful and scary because they see the world as being ugly, awful, and scary, and they just kind of interpret everything that way. So those people are going to feel that way, particularly if they, again, they may be religious. They are likely to run into some trouble there because they haven't really been a good little boy and a good little girl all their life. So they're worried about dying in an operation, going to hell. And that's a worry that they take with them. And if that's a worry they take with them, then they might find things like that when they're there. You see? So it just depends on their state of mind at the time that they exit and get into the consciousness world, and their beliefs and so on. So that's what's going on for most people most of the time. They just get in consciousness and they look around and they get some connection that this reality is bigger than just the physical. And that's really all they're meant to take away, and that it's about love and caring. Now, some people won't get the love and caring thing because they're not ready for that. They won't see that. They might not accept that. So maybe they'll just get a conversation, or maybe they'll talk to dead relatives. Whatever would work for them, then that's basically what they're going to get.
Now, those people that interpret a negative aspect of this experience, how do they come back? And I was wondering if you've ever heard of anyone returning from a negative experience, what would their outlook be? I mean, most of the stories you hear, people come back completely changed. They have a whole other understanding of what they're here for and what
Right,
this reality
right,
is about. But I haven't
right.
heard about anybody coming back from a negative experience. What would they come back
Well,
and
it works
experience?
pretty much the same way. You know, when you get this introduction to consciousness, you know, from the larger consciousness system, the typical response is, wow, you know, there is something else besides the physical. And, you know, that must be the afterlife if you're religious, or that just, you know, is the way consciousness works if you're not. And it's such a plus, because people worry about this. You know, they have this fear of death, and that kind of takes away that fear of death once you realize that you are consciousness, and as consciousness, you're immortal. You go on. Consciousness doesn't die. The avatar dies. So that's a very positive and often life-changing experience, because they've read the story, but now they actually experience it. And that's a big difference. You read the story and it's all in your intellect. Once you experience it, it's at a deep place for you. And that's the big, big deal. Now, the people who get it negative, they have a similar kind of thing, but it's all on the negative side. So now they have this idea that, okay, maybe I hallucinated it. So some of them will just kind of write it off because it wasn't a happy experience. They will try to justify it as something else. So they may say, it was just a hallucination. I made that all up. It was just my negativity. But many who realize that it was more than that what they saw was outside of them, it will frighten them. And now their fear of death is even stronger than it was before. And they will feel ill at ease because of it. And it'll just be one more step down that kind of descending path, into fear. So it is a negative experience for them. The system doesn't like to support that. The system doesn't send them scary things. The system sends them things that are not scary. But they may devolve into that because what they're getting is probably 90% out of their own imagination, 90% out of their own consciousness. That's the data stream they're getting. And that data is representing their own fear that's inside of them. So they're getting, their data stream is largely from their own fear, from their own imagination. And the system that's trying to give them something positive is like, whoa, over here, look this way, here I am, life is good, follow the bright light. And these people are more drawn to the scary because fearful people are drawn to fearful things. That's just the way it is. So they're drawn to this thing. And once they get drawn to it, they kind of get sucked into it. And that's where, how it is, you get involved in something, you kind of drop, all the other stuff gets dropped out. You just kind of focus in on that. So I think they get the negative initially out of their own consciousness because they are negative inside. And then that tends to consume them to where they don't see anything else. And if the system even forces the white light message into them, they would push it aside. They would push it aside as they're too engaged in this negative thing because fearful people engage in fearful stuff. So that's why they have it. And that's why the system doesn't like override it and make them have a positive experience. Is one, the system never violates your free will and you get to do what you do. So if you start the process negatively, then you get kind of fixated or absorbed in that negative thing, then you're just going to have a negative trip. It's going to be a bad trip from beginning to end. And when you come back, you'll probably be even a little more fearful than you were when you started.
Well, that seems really sad to me. That is one of the reasons that you stress one of the most important things to work on is to get rid of your fear here.
Right. If you don't get rid of your fear, you'll find scary stuff everywhere, and you will interpret things fearfully. You will be quick to believe in things being fearful. The fearful things will grab your attention. So, if you're partly, you look at people in our culture, and if you had a newspaper and on the front page of this newspaper was Sally and Jim and their 5 children had a wonderful time having a picnic last Saturday. And another one says, George and Harry and Pete got run over by a cement truck and, everybody died. Well, if they look at that, their vision, if you're fearful, like most people are fearful, their interest will be immediately to the disaster, to what happened, to the person who walked into some restaurant and opened up fire with an automatic rifle or something. That will grab their attention immediately. And the news that was happy, good news, yeah, but that's not important. We gotta look at this negative stuff. People who are fearful, gravitate to fearful things. That's what interests them. That is their reality. And this other stuff, isn't important. The important stuff is the scary stuff.
I think it really drives home the point that you have to do your own work. I wasn't aware of this negativity carrying over to a near-death experience, but it does illustrate the point that you can't work on something for someone else, that this work that we're doing is individual. The person has to keep working at this, keep digging the source of their fear and keep trying to overcome it. It's a very individual process. It's
Right. And the
very
system
interesting.
cannot do it for you. You have to do that on your own. It's what I call, it's growing up. It's raising the quality of your consciousness. There's lots of ways to say the same thing. It's reducing the entropy of your consciousness, but it's something you have to do. Nobody can grow up for you. You have to grow up. You have to change who you are and become somebody who's less fearful and more caring, more cooperative, make it about other, not about self. So that is the direction of consciousness evolution. Consciousness is not a magical, supernatural thing. Consciousness is a natural system, just the system of consciousness. And we're pieces of that system of consciousness. And consciousness is evolving like everything else. It changes, it grows. So here we are trying to grow up, and we have a lot of fear. And some people who hear this will say, well, I don't think I have any fear. How do you know if you have fear? And it's an easy test. If in your life, if you look back over the last weeks or months, just your short-term memory, how far does it go back? Maybe a couple of months. If you have in any time felt upset, annoyed, angry, unappreciated, inadequate, if you have any of those are called negative feelings. If you have any negative feelings at all, then you have fear. Because if you didn't have the fear, you would not get angry or upset or annoyed. You wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be possible. You only do that because you have fear. You only do that because you're self-focused rather than other-focused. Things aren't the way you need them to be, aren't the way they should be, aren't the way that's the best way. And that then tells us that almost everybody has these negative feelings almost every day. Many people, they have them almost every hour of every day. Many people just live like that all the time. Their life is full of complaint and upset and annoyance. They just complain and fuss all the time about all sorts of things. So that's almost typical. Well, that's because we're very fearful. Now, the system tries hard when somebody just kind of pops out of body because they have an NDE. The NDE means that they're near death. Well, if they die, then they're going to pop out of body. That's what happens when you die. Well, they're so close that it kind of triggers an out of body, if you will, but the body's still chugging along or gets resuscitated or whatever, so they have to go back. So that's just normally what happens when you die. So this happens sometimes to people when they don't die, or when they die but come back quickly. So that's where the NDE is. So it's just a natural process that it happens that way. So that's any kind of magical thing. You just are consciousness, and when your avatar dies, you just become aware that you're someplace else. You're not in that physical reality anymore. So that's just natural. So that's not a mystical thing. It's just the way consciousness works. So the system would like people to have a positive experience. So they just happen to pop out of body because their body just died for 30 seconds or something, and pop out they go because that's just the way it works. And the system doesn't want them to find a scary thing and come back more frightened than they were, because remember, the system's trying to evolve out of fear, not to cause more fear. But sometimes people are fearful enough, particularly if they've had a fearful mindset when they started. And lots of people have fearful mindsets when they start a major operation, when they know that they may not survive it. That's not necessarily a fearless thing when you're going into this operation and you only have a certain percentage probability that you're going to survive it. So people have sometimes negative and frightened attitudes. And if they do, those are the ones that then can get trapped in that attitude and have a bad experience. Now, those that accept that and say, well, okay, everybody dies, maybe this is my time, and I've accepted that that's a possibility, then they're more relaxed with that. They're not so fearful. And then they just find themselves someplace else. And it's like, oh, what's this? Where am I? Oh, look at the light. And they have this wonderful experience. So the system would like everybody to have a wonderful experience, but it can't overrun people's free will and shove the experience down their throat. If they're somehow got a negative thing going on, then that's just the way it is. So that's why some of them are like that. It's not that the system is mean and, why would the system let them have that meaning? Well, it's not the system's choice to choose it. They have free will and they have responsibility for their choices.
And on the other hand, I've known a couple of people who have had near-death experiences, and it's been wonderful for them. It's been an eye-opening experience, but there was that positivity, that kindness from the beginning. That's how they had it. That's the outlook they had. And
Sure.
they had it was even more reinforced with this near-death
Right.
experience.
Right.
They
So
just
if
come
you,
back fearless.
yes. So if you are positive going in, before that experience, you'll be even more positive coming out the other side. It'll be a big boost to your sense of, well, I thought it was like that, but now I know because I've been there and experienced it. And that's a very positive and for many people, life-changing experience. But why do people pop out? Well, because that's what happens when you die. And if you almost die or die for a short period of time, then you do that. People pop out of bodies spontaneously lots of times. The system has other reasons, not just if you're on an operating table or you're almost dead. There's other things. Look at the literature of people who jumped out of airplanes with a parachute. The parachute didn't open until the very last instant. And maybe they still broke a leg or something, but they didn't die from it. And you'll find that some of those will tell you that they popped out of body because their situation looked like it was likely to be terminal. And the system doesn't want you to experience that smush. It wants your exit to be, not so painful or negative. So you pop out before you hit the ground. If you look at those kinds of reports, you'll see
Yeah.
that happens. Now, sometimes people don't. Sometimes people hang right with it, trying to untangle wires and do everything all the way down because they're really focused on what they're doing. But for those who kind of get to the point that, no help for it now, they tend to then sometimes pop out of body because that's kind of it's a natural way that those things work. Other people pop out of body like Bob Monroe just because they lie down and want to go to sleep, and it just happens anyway. So that's a different thing. But having a near-death experience, having an out-of-body experience, having a lucid dream are all related. They're all connected. They're all first cousins, to each other. It's just the circumstances of how you got there is the main difference, and the mindset you're in when you get there. If you're in an NDE, you kind of get there and suddenly you're aware, oh, what happened? Well, that's also true if you are just driving down the road, paying attention to your driving, and somebody crosses the line head on into you and you die instantly. It was real quick. You didn't have a lot of time to think about it. Well, it's the same way as the near-death experience. You just suddenly, oh, where am I? What's going on? Oh, look at the light. You see, you do a similar kind of thing to an NDE. So the going out of body is something that you can learn how to do, and then you can go explore consciousness space. You can go exploring, and exploring consciousness space is like a single player game. You're now getting information from the system that defines the reality that you're interacting in, and the system's sending you that. But again, it's your interpretation.
That leads into our difference between lucid dream and an out-of-body state. So can you elaborate a little on that difference?
Well, okay, I can. First of all, like we just said, they're all similar in that you find yourself aware inside the consciousness system. Now, when you find yourself aware, That means you're in a situation where you can make choices. You have awareness, and you also have choices. So when you find yourself in that kind of a state, there's many ways that you could get there, and NDE is one of them. Just being run over by a truck and dying, that's another one. Very close to the NDE, except the NDE people don't actually die, or they only die for a very short period. Or you can train yourself how to do that and basically just disconnect your consciousness from this data stream that is a data stream defining what we call the physical universe, planet Earth, where we live in the physical universe. You just let that data stream go and you connect on to a different data stream. Now you're in some other reality, because every reality that you can experience in, if you can experience in a reality, it's a virtual reality. Consciousness is the only thing that's fundamental. So when you pop out at an NDE, the reason you do that is that your body died temporarily, and now you're in a single player game with the larger consciousness system. And what the system is going to send you is, hey, guess what it's like in consciousness? Here, move to the light. That's the game you get. Okay, that's the single player game that sends you the data stream for that game. When you do it as an out of body, okay, you just go into a meditation state, you let go of all your sense data, then you just grab some other data stream, and now you're in a single player game, again, with a larger conscious system, and it's called go exploring. And you maybe go places and meet people and do things. And then if you're in a lucid dream, which means you start by going to sleep, but then you wake up as consciousness, not as a body, but you wake up as an aware consciousness. See, that's different. The avatar is still asleep, but you're an aware consciousness, and then you look around and you get a data stream, and that is what you experience. So again, people limit their experience based on their beliefs. So if you believe that a lucid dream only lets you move around and experience the dream reality, so you're going to move around like inside of what you might call a dream reality. If that's a belief of yours, then that's the only thing that will happen, because anything else you'll just push aside as anomalous data. It doesn't mean anything to you. The only stuff that you accept and that you find meaningful, that you can translate into something meaningful, is what you're expecting, which is you're stuck in the dream reality. Just like remote viewers. Now, remote viewers aren't going out of their body. They're not getting into another system. They're getting data out of a system. And if they believe that all they can do is remote view places here on Earth, then that's the only thing they'll be able to do. But if they believe, oh, I can remote view backside of the moon. No, I can remote view what happened 10 years ago in the past. I can remote view probable future. Well, then they realize that it's not just eyeballs on the Earth, but if that's what they believe, then that belief will color their interpretation of the data, and then they won't see anything else other than that, because anything else gets rejected. We do that when we have beliefs about things, and data comes in that's contrary to our beliefs, we tend to reject it. Now, I'm not talking about the intellectual level necessarily. I'm talking about how we operate at a more fundamental level as human beings. We're not all just intellect. There's more to us than that. And that's the level that I'm talking about. So, an out of body is somebody who does not fall asleep first. They're conscious, and they just transfer their consciousness to some other reality, which means they let go of one data stream and connect to another. If you do a lucid dream, first you go to sleep and lose consciousness. Then while you're asleep and in a dream, you regain awareness, and there you are. Now, you get a data stream and you go do whatever you do in a lucid dream. And if you have an NDE, well, you you temporarily die, your heart stops for 30 seconds or something, and you pop out of body, and the system sends you a data stream. So now if you're out of body, you can kind of pick a data stream. Oh, I was out of body once and I went to this place and talked to those people. I'd like to go back there. Well, bingo, you can go back there. System will give you, will give you a data stream that's, a single player game in that situation. But you don't have a situation if your heart stopped. So now you just are an NDE. There is no situation. So the system just gives you, hello, welcome to consciousness. This is what it's all about. You're not stuck in that little physical world. There's more to reality than that. Here, feel what it's like and experience what it's like to be consciousness. So you get to feel and experience what the larger consciousness feels and experiences, which is being connected to everything. All right, so it's just different ways of approaching the same thing. The system will give you a data stream that is suitable for you, your beliefs, where you are, what you're doing, and what's the point of it? The point of it is that we evolve our consciousness quality by getting rid of fear and becoming love. And we do that by making choices. That's how we evolve. We make a choice. And if we make a good choice, then we get rid of some of our fear. We evolve the quality of our consciousness. We lower our entropy. If we make a poor choice, we end up with more fear. We increase our entropy. You see, so by making good choices, we change who we are. And it's the same way kids grow up. When you're 3 years old, you're making choices. And you grow up by changing the way you make choices. When you're 3 years old, you're very self-centered. But you learn to care about other people. You learn to be courteous and considerate. And you have to learn all these things. Generally don't come in that way, but you learn these things and you grow up. Well, that's the same way. We're consciousness and we're growing up, and we grow up by the quality of the choices we make. If those choices are choices that move us toward caring, cooperation, about other, becoming love, then we are growing up. We're evolving the quality of our consciousness. That's the whole point, making choices. Now, we can make choices in this virtual reality we call the physical universe. That's what we do. We walk around, on the earth, and we interact with other people, and we make choices. And by those, we evolve. When we're out of body, we have a whole different set of choices, different circumstances, different things. And that gives us just a wider breadth of experience, a wider selection of choices. I call that decision space. It opens up our decision space. Okay. So that's the point. When you are having a lucid dream, it's the same thing. When you're having a regular night dream, it's the same thing. When you're dreaming at night, a regular dream, you have choices. Oh, you're in a burning building. Oh no, what do I do? And you can make these choices. And by those choices in that dream, you evolve or you de-evolve your consciousness. By those choices in that out of body, you evolve or de-evolve your consciousness. And by those choices in that NDE, you evolve or de-evolve your consciousness. So that's the point. You get all these different data streams, these different little single player games from the system, because they help you grow up. They give you a wider depth and breadth of choices to make in different kinds of situations. So that helps you grow up. Just like somebody who's never been more than 20 miles away from where they were born is very provincial in a very small reality. Somebody that spent years traveling around the world, living in different places, spending years in different cultures. Well, we say that the one is provincial and the other is sophisticated. But really, one has a much broader set of experiences. That's all. One just has a broader set of things that they've encountered and dealt with and learned from. So it helps them grow up. It's not so much that they're sophisticated, like somehow they're special. They're just have a bigger experience base. We're getting a broader, deeper experience base by doing out of body, by doing, by having an NDE, by having lucid dreams. So it's just part of the way the system helps us grow, is by giving us all these various opportunities to experience and make choices. So then look at people, let's say in our culture, who are mainly materialists. Okay, the scientists, the lawyers, the doctors, the engineers. These people tend to say, oh, out of body, nonsense. NDEs, nonsense. These people are making it all up. They're all hallucinations. Lucid dreaming, nonsense. Okay, so what it is that they are unable to make use of all of that additional experience. It doesn't come to them. They only have their experience here in the physical and in their night dreams. That's it. So they're limited to those two things. It's like, well, I was born in this city, but every once in a while I travel to that city. So I've got these two different places that I've been, or I travel here, I had a vacation and I went to this spot. So they've got that sort of thing, but they tend to be more provincial in the sense that they will say, oh, none of that stuff exists, because it's not in their experience. And the reason it's not in their experience is because they have beliefs that it's impossible, couldn't possibly exist. Therefore, their reality in large measure is created by their own beliefs. Yes, it's a shared game, so it's not just their beliefs, but their beliefs are part of what makes their reality their reality.
Well,
So,
that's a
yeah,
fair point too, that the doctors and lawyers and engineers, but I will have to defend some of our out-of-body explorers who are doctors and lawyers and engineers and
Oh,
computer
yes.
technicians. We have the exceptions to the rule,
Yes.
and actually, for the most part, they are highly educated. So it's a really interesting thing. It is something about the consciousness that drives that need to know.
Exactly. And typically what that is that a person will have some kind of a paranormal experience. Something will just happen to them. Maybe it's an NDE, we'll call that a paranormal experience, not a normal experience. Or maybe, their mother died and came back and was standing at the foot of their bed and had a conversation with them, or something happened like that. And they had some kind of an experience that falls under the paranormal, and they know it was a real experience. They know it wasn't a hallucination, and they become what's called a seeker. So they start to look around and find books and scan the internet for other people who have had similar experiences, which leads them into a bigger understanding. And yes, that's how we get people like that. Almost always these people have had some kind of life-changing experience that turned them into seekers. And after 5 or 10 or 20 years of seeking, they begin to find understanding and they find answers.
And they find Tom Campbell. No,
Sometimes they
good point.
sometimes they do.
It's a
But
good point.
that's
That's a
kind of
common thread
that
of
is
the people. Yeah.
that's a common thread. So the people who don't ever have those experiences, or who have them but reject them. They've had those experiences, but they find it so disconcerting that they repress it. They push it down, say, well, I don't know, that just didn't happen, and I must have just imagined it, and they somehow throw it away. Then those people shut themselves off from that path of becoming a seeker and learning more. And these seekers, it's not that they get mushy-headed and believe anything. They bring their intellects and their science and their logical thinking with them. And
yes, I was going to say it's a brave thing that they do. Those logical left brain people coming to want to know more
Right.
want to seek it out.
Yeah, but they definitely want logic. They don't want somebody to tell them a pretty story. They want to understand what happened. What did it mean? Why did it happen? And if they can find good, logical, scientific answers to those questions, it makes them feel so much better, because now they can take that strange experience and now understand it as to what it was, why it happened, and what it meant. So that's why they seek, because they want that understanding. So, but there's lots of people who won't become seekers because they're too tied to their beliefs to open their mind enough to become a seeker. If something happens to them that's paranormal or unusual, they'll either bury it or ignore it, or just refuse to think about it. Denial is often a thing. It's just that strange thing, and they won't go there because it's in conflict with what they believe. So anyway, that's kind of the whole thing. And you see these NDEs, the out of bodies, the lucid dream, they're all first cousins. They're all just different ways of letting go of one data stream and connecting to another. And that other data stream, all the data streams, our data stream that defines this physical universe is also from the larger consciousness system. That's another virtual reality. All experiential realities are virtual realities. Any reality in which you can experience things is a virtual reality. You get a data stream, you interpret the data stream with your own biases, and that becomes your reality. So yes, all of us walking around here on this planet all have a little different reality because we've interpreted, but because we share, it's a multiplayer game, we share. Our interpretations overlap with other people's interpretations because it's a multiplayer game. We're getting similar data streams. Yes, we both see the table, in the middle of the room because that table is in my data stream and your data stream. So it's a multiplayer game, as opposed to the NDEs, out of bodies, and lucid dreaming, which are almost all single player games. And even when you have those, a single player game doesn't mean that you're the only consciousness in it. It just means that all the other consciousnesses are what they call non-player characters, NPCs. So they're all there as part of that game, and they're selected to give you situations in which you get to make choices. And by those choices, you learn. So they're all educational games. But remember, you can add to that game with your own consciousness, with your own imagination. So you can have a data stream from the larger conscious system, and you can add to that from your own imagination, because your imagination also can create information, and you can get information from all three sources, right? The LCS, your imagination, and other individuated units of consciousness. So here you are in a single player game, but something triggers a belief or a fear or something, and you start making up stuff. So, oh, look, there's a monster. Well, that's your own fear. It's not that the larger conscious system put a monster in your game. It's your own fear created that monster in your game. So these three sources of information can be mixed and mingled at any time, and they often are. So it's not a pure single player game, because a lot of times your own fears and your imagination and your attitudes will come in to add elements or take elements away from what you're getting from the system. Or you may be just 100% in your imagination, and you don't know. There's no way to tell for sure whether it's A, B, or C as far as your data stream without experience. Now, once you have experience, and if you do this regularly, and you've been out of body, 500 or 600 times, and you've lucid dreamed 500 or 600 times, I don't know anybody has 500 or 600 NDEs. It'd be an awful lot of close escapes. But if you do these other things a lot of times, eventually you'll get a sense for where that data is coming from, because each one feels and works a little differently. And you'll be able to tell, oh, this is a system. Oh, this is my own, I'm adding this stuff into what's the system, and oh, this is somebody else. This is somebody giving me some other IUOC. And you can tend to separate them, not with 100% confidence, but maybe 95 or 98, depending on your experience, percent confidence level. They still don't have signs on them, tabs to define them. So you never get 100% sure, but you can get pretty sure. But that happens only with experience. In the beginning, you have no idea where any of it's coming from. So in the beginning, you just experience and don't worry about where it's coming from. And eventually, after you've had enough experience, you can make that assessment reasonably well. So it's all a mix of these things. It's not just one pure thing or another. That's why the out of bodies are so varied. Some people out of body say, oh, out of body's like this. And somebody says, no, not mine. Mine's like that. Well, there's a lot of variation there. Not only are there a lot of single player games, but people are putting their own imagination and their own beliefs and their own interpretations into it that color it. So that's why there's so many differences. It's not like all those differences show that it's fake and it's just a hallucination. No, it may be just an imagination, but it can be a lot more than that. It just takes experience to understand the difference.
Well, Tom, there's a lot of very valuable insights there. Thank you so much for this really good discussion.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our newly created Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.